A December snowstorm in Stockholm. A millionaire tech CEO cutting through a frozen park. Two abandoned children, one holding a dying baby. What happened next would turn a man who had everything yet nothing into the father he never knew he could be. This is a story about the moment kindness stopped being a choice and became destiny. If you believe that one act of courage can change everything, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications because this story will remind you that kindness isn't just about giving, it's about becoming. Let's begin. December in Stockholm is unforgiving. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it reaches inside and reminds you that winter here means business. On this particular evening, the wind cut through Humlegarden Park like a knife, carrying snow that had transformed from beautiful to brutal in less than an hour. Victor Lindgren pulled his Burberry coat tighter as he walked, his mind still churning through the board meeting that had stretched 2 hours past schedule. At 38, he'd built Lindgren Technologies from a small startup into a multi-million-euro enterprise. Success had his name on glossy magazine covers. But it had also cost him his marriage, his daily relationship with his daughter, and somewhere along the way his joy. His ex-wife had taken their daughter Stella to London 3 years ago. He saw her during holidays and summers, but the rest of the time, his penthouse apartment sat immaculate and achingly empty. Tonight, he was cutting through the park because his driver had called in sick, and Victor had decided to walk the 15 blocks home rather than wait for a car service. The Christmas lights strung through the bare trees should have been magical. Instead, they only emphasized how alone he felt, how the holiday season had become just another stretch of time to endure. That's when he heard it. A small voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, sir. Help us." Victor stopped, turning toward a snow-covered bench. Standing there was a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a tan jacket far too thin for this weather. His jeans were worn at the knees. His brown hair was damp with melting snow, his cheeks burning red from cold. But it was his eyes that made Victor's heart clench. Wide, terrified, yet trying so desperately to be brave. "Yes." Victor approached carefully, looking around for a parent. "Are you lost?" "Sir," the boy's voice cracked. "My baby sister is freezing. I don't know what to do." That's when Victor noticed the bundle in the child's arms. A baby, wrapped in what looked like a threadbare blanket. She was crying, but weakly, the sound growing softer. And Victor, who hadn't thought about infant care in nearly a decade, knew instinctively that this was very, very bad. Babies who stopped crying in the cold weren't getting better. They were shutting down. "Where are your parents?" Victor asked, already pulling off his coat. The boy's brave face crumbled. "Mama left us here. She said she'd be right back, just 10 minutes. But that was so long ago. Before it got dark. I tried to keep Freya warm, but she won't stop crying. And now," his voice dropped to a whisper, "now she's getting quiet. Mama always said that's bad. When babies get too quiet." "You're right," Victor said, wrapping his expensive coat around both children. "That is bad. What's your name?" "Oscar." "Okay, Oscar. I'm Victor. We need to get you and your sister somewhere warm right now. Will you come with me?" He watched the conflict play across the boy's young face. Don't talk to strangers. Every child knew that rule. But his baby sister was dying in his arms, and this stranger was offering help. "I promise I'm safe," Victor said gently, crouching to the boy's eye level. "I have a daughter myself. Her name is Stella. If she were in trouble, I'd want someone to help her. Let me help you." Oscar nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Okay." Victor scooped the baby into his arms, keeping his coat wrapped around both children. Freya, that's what Oscar had called her, was frighteningly cold to touch. Her tiny face was red and scrunched, her cries now just weak whimpers that made Victor's chest tight with fear. He calculated distances quickly. Hospital, 10 blocks. His apartment, 6. He made a decision. "We're going to my home first to warm you both up. Then I'm calling for medical help. Is that all right?" "Yes, sir," Oscar whispered. They moved quickly through the snowy streets, Victor's expensive Italian shoes slipping on ice, his suit jacket completely inadequate against the December wind. But he barely noticed. Oscar walked beside him, one small hand clutching Victor's sleeve, the other wiping at frozen tears. "How long were you out there?" Victor asked as they walked. "I don't know. A long time. Mama said 10 minutes. But then it started snowing harder, and it got dark, and she didn't come back." Oscar's voice was so small. Did she forget about us?" Victor's throat tightened. What kind of mother left a baby and young child on a park bench in December? Even if she'd meant to return quickly, where was she now? I don't know, he said honestly. But right now, we're going to focus on getting you both safe and warm. The building doorman, Anders, did a double take as they entered the marble lobby. Mr. Lindgren, is everything? Call Dr. Bergstrom. Tell him it's an emergency. I need him at my apartment immediately. Then call the police non-emergency line. Tell them I found 2 children abandoned in Humlegarden Park. Right away, sir. In the elevator, Victor looked down at the baby in his arms. Freya had stopped crying altogether. Her tiny body was limp. His heart pounded with fear. Fear he hadn't felt since Stella was born, since he'd held his own daughter for the first time and realized how fragile, how precious life could be. That protective instinct he thought had died with his divorce came roaring back to life. These children needed him. And for the first time in 3 years, Victor Lindgren felt like he had a purpose beyond quarterly earnings reports. His apartment was warm, thank God for that. Victor went straight to the living room, laying Freya gently on the couch while keeping her wrapped in his coat. Oscar hovered nearby, anxiety written all over his small face. Oscar, I need you to help me. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Go into that room, my bedroom. Grab all the blankets you can find. We need to warm Freya up slowly. While Oscar ran to collect blankets, Victor carefully unwrapped the baby. Her lips had a bluish tinge. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. He rubbed her tiny hands gently, trying to stimulate circulation, talking to her softly. Come on, little one. Stay with me. You're safe now. You're going to be okay. Oscar returned with an armful of blankets, and together, this millionaire CEO and this brave little boy, they created a warm nest for a dying baby. Victor turned the thermostat up as high as it would go. He put a kettle on for hot water bottles. He timed Freya's breathing as best he could, his business mind shifting into crisis management mode. But this wasn't a business crisis. This was life and death. And as he looked at Oscar's terrified face, at Freya's tiny struggling body, something cracked open inside Victor's chest. He'd spent 3 years feeling empty, feeling like success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Now, in the space of 30 minutes, 2 freezing children had walked into his life. And somehow Victor knew nothing would ever be the same again. The doorbell rang 15 minutes later. Dr. Bergstrom arrived first, his medical bag in hand, his face grave as Victor explained what had happened. Behind him came 2 police officers, Detective Nielsen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, and her partner, a younger officer named Eric. While Dr. Bergstrom examined Freya on the couch, Victor led Oscar into the kitchen. He wrapped the boy's cold hands around a mug of hot chocolate, watching as Oscar's fingers, red and swollen from frostbite, slowly regained their color. You did everything right, Victor told him gently. You kept your sister as warm as you could. And you asked for help. That was incredibly brave. Is Freya going to be okay? Oscar's voice trembled. The doctor is with her now. She's in good hands. Detective Nielsen pulled up a chair, her voice soft. Oscar, can you tell me what happened today? Starting from the beginning. The story came out in halting pieces. Their mother, Annika, was a single parent struggling with addiction. She'd been clean for 6 months, really trying, Oscar insisted with desperate loyalty. But recently, things had gotten bad again. That afternoon, she'd told Oscar they were going to the park. Once there, she'd left them on the bench, saying she'd be right back. Just 10 minutes. She'd taken her purse, her phone, everything. Oscar had waited, keeping Freya as warm as he could. But minutes turned to hours. The sun set. The temperature dropped. The snow came harder. And his mother never returned. I was afraid to leave the bench, Oscar whispered. Mama said to wait there. But then Freya started crying from the cold, and she wouldn't stop. And I knew I needed to find help. You did exactly the right thing, Detective Nielsen assured him. Do you have any other family? Grandparents? Aunts or uncles? Oscar shook his head. Just Mama and more grandmother, but she lives far away. I don't remember where. Dr. Bergstrom emerged from the living room, and Victor's heart stopped at the expression on his face. The baby is suffering from hypothermia, moderate, not severe. I've stabilized her temperature, and she's responding well. But she needs to be monitored at a hospital overnight. He paused, looking directly at Victor. It's fortunate you found them when you did, Mr. Lindgren. Another hour out in that cold, dressed like that. He didn't need to finish the sentence. And Oscar? Victor asked, his hand unconsciously resting on the boy's shoulder. Cold, exhausted, mild frostbite on his fingers. But he'll be fine with rest and warmth. He's a remarkably tough child. The next hours blurred together in a flurry of activity. An ambulance arrived to take Freya to the hospital for observation. Oscar refused to be separated from his sister, clinging to Victor's hand with desperate strength. "I'll go with you," Victor heard himself say, looking at Detective Nielsen. "If that's all right." She nodded. "We'll need statements from both you and Oscar anyway. The hospital works." At the hospital, Victor sat in the pediatric ward while doctors examined both children more thoroughly. He called his assistant, Ingrid, explaining the situation and asking her to clear his calendar for tomorrow. He called his lawyer, getting advice on the legal implications of what he'd done. And he texted his ex-wife, saying he might need to postpone Stella's visit this weekend, though he didn't explain why. Oscar sat beside him in the waiting room, now wearing hospital scrubs that were far too large, still drowning in Victor's Burberry coat, which he refused to give up. "Mr. Victor? You can just call me Victor." "Victor, what's going to happen to us? If Mama doesn't come back, where will Freya and I go?" Victor had been wondering the same thing. He knew the system, foster care, group homes, the bureaucracy that often separated siblings when no suitable placement could be found for both. He thought of Stella, safe and loved with her mother in London. He thought of his empty apartment, his empty life. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I promise you this, I'll make sure you and Freya stay together. Whatever it takes." Detective Nielsen returned 2 hours later with news. They'd located the mother. She'd been arrested several blocks from the park, attempting to buy drugs. She was incoherent, barely remembered leaving her children, was now being held for child endangerment and several other charges. "The children will need placement," Detective Nielsen explained carefully. "Child services is backed up, especially this time of year. They're looking for a foster home that can take both children, but—" She trailed off, her expression sympathetic. Victor knew what she wasn't saying. The likelihood of finding a home that could take both a traumatized 7-year-old and an infant on short notice was slim. They'd be separated, put in different homes. Oscar would lose his sister on top of everything else. "What if I took them?" The words were out of Victor's mouth before his brain could catch up. Everyone turned to stare at him. "You?" Detective Nielsen looked skeptical. "Mr. Lindgren, you're a single man with no experience with children. I have a daughter. I raised her for her first 3 years before my divorce. That's different from taking in 2 children who've just been through severe trauma." "I'm not saying permanently," Victor said, though even as he spoke, he wasn't sure that was true. "Just temporarily, until child services can do a proper assessment. They're comfortable with me. I have the space, the resources. I can hire a nanny, a child psychologist, whatever they need." He looked at Oscar, who was watching this exchange with desperate, fragile hope in his eyes. They've been through enough tonight. Being separated, going to strange places with strange people. That's more trauma. "Let me help." Detective Nielsen sighed. "I'll make the call, but I can't promise anything. This is highly irregular." It took 4 hours. Countless phone calls. An emergency home inspection by a social worker. Victor calling in every favor he had with people in high places. But by 3 a.m, he was driving home through empty Stockholm streets with 2 sleeping children in his car. Freya was strapped into a hospital-provided car seat, still being monitored closely, but cleared for discharge. Oscar was buckled in beside her, his hand resting protectively on his sister's carrier, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Victor glanced at them in the rearview mirror and thought, what have I just done? 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been a quarterly earnings report. Now he had 2 traumatized children in his care, no idea what he was doing, and a future that had suddenly become very, very complicated. Back at the apartment, Victor set up the guest room for Oscar and created a makeshift nursery in his home office for Freya. He fed the baby a bottle while Oscar watched anxiously, finally relaxing when Freya drank hungrily, her color looking so much better. "She's going to be okay," Victor assured Oscar again. "You saved her life, you know, by asking for help when you did." "I was scared," Oscar admitted quietly. "I thought maybe you'd be bad. Mama always said don't talk to strangers. But Freya was so cold, and I didn't know what else to do. You made the right choice. I know your mother taught you about stranger danger, and that's important. But knowing when to break that rule in an emergency, that's important too. You're incredibly brave, Oscar." But when he'd looked at Oscar's desperate face in the park, when he'd felt Freya's cold little body in his arms, something had cracked open inside him. That protective instinct he'd thought had died with his divorce had roared back to life. These children needed help. He could provide it. The choice had felt inevitable. His phone rang at 7 a.m. Ingrid, his assistant. Please tell me the news articles I'm seeing aren't real. Did you really take in 2 abandoned children last night? How is that already in the news? Someone at the hospital posted on social media. It's everywhere. You're being called a hero, a guardian angel. The PR team is going crazy. Tell them no comment, Victor said tiredly. This isn't a publicity stunt. This is just, I couldn't leave them. There was a pause. Then Ingrid's voice softened. I know. That's why I've rescheduled your entire week. You focus on those kids. I'll handle the company. And so began the strangest week of Victor Lindgren's life. A week that would change everything. Over the next few weeks, Victor Lindgren got a crash course in parenting. He hired a nanny, Mrs. Anderson, a grandmother who'd raised 5 children of her own and handled Freya's needs with expert ease. He met with child psychologists who helped him understand Oscar's trauma and how to address it. He learned to make bottles and change diapers all over again, his expensive suits often ending up covered in spit-up. He learned that Oscar had nightmares about being cold and needed a night light and someone to check on him every hour. He learned that Freya had an impressive set of lungs when she was hungry. But he also learned that Oscar was whip-smart, reading at an 11-year-old level despite being only 7. That he loved astronomy and had a million questions about everything. That he was fiercely protective of his baby sister and wouldn't let her out of his sight for the first 3 days. And that he was terrified, absolutely terrified, that Victor would change his mind and send them away. I'm not going anywhere, Victor assured him one evening as they built a blanket fort in the living room, Freya sleeping peacefully in her carrier nearby. You and Freya are safe here for as long as you need. What about our mama? Oscar asked quietly. Victor had gotten updates from Detective Nielsen. Annika was in custody, facing serious charges. She'd admitted to a year-long relapse into drug addiction, to neglecting her children, to desperate choices that had endangered their lives. She'd cried when told her children were safe. She'd begged to see them. But the courts had denied contact pending a full investigation. Your mother is sick, Victor told Oscar carefully. Not sick with a cold or flu, but sick in her brain with something called addiction. It makes her make bad choices, even when she loves you very much. She's going to get help now, but it's going to take a long time. So we can't go home? Not right now. Maybe not for a long time. Victor paused. But Oscar, I need you to understand something. None of this is your fault. Not your mother's sickness, not what happened in the park. You're a kid. Your only job is to be a kid. The adults are supposed to take care of you. And when they don't, that's not your fault. Oscar was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, I'm glad you found us. I'm glad you're not a bad stranger. 3 weeks later, Victor sat in family court, listening to a judge review the case. Annika had been sentenced to a rehabilitation program and would be incarcerated for at least a year. Upon release, she'd have to prove sobriety and parenting fitness before even supervised visits would be allowed. In the meantime, the children needed stable placement. Mr. Lindgren, the judge said, looking at Victor over her reading glasses. You've been caring for these children for 3 weeks now. Child Services reports that both children are thriving in your care. Freya's pediatrician says she's developing normally, no lasting effects from her exposure. Oscar is attending school, seeing a therapist, and by all accounts doing remarkably well. Yes, Your Honor. I'm prepared to grant you temporary foster custody, with the understanding that this is an unusual situation. You'll have monthly reviews, home visits, the works. If at any point Child Services feels the placement isn't working, they'll move the children. Do you understand? I do, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward slightly. May I ask, why are you doing this? You're a busy CEO. You have no obligation to these children. Victor glanced back to where Mrs. Anderson sat holding Freya, with Oscar beside them. The little boy gave him a tentative smile. When I found them that night, they were scared and cold and in danger. I helped because that's what any decent person would do. But then, over these past weeks, they've become part of my life. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Oscar helps me understand things I'd forgotten. What it's like to be curious about everything, to believe in good things, to trust even when you've been hurt. Freya reminds me that life is precious and fragile and worth protecting. His voice caught slightly. They've given me more than I've given them. So I'm doing this because they need a home, and I need them. We've become a family, even if it wasn't the traditional way. The judge smiled slightly. Foster custody is granted. Good luck, Mr. Lindgren. 6 months later, when Stella came to visit from London, Victor worried about how she'd react to suddenly having to share her father. But Stella, at 11, took one look at Oscar and Freya and fell completely in love. "Papa, they're perfect," she declared, holding Freya while Oscar showed her his astronomy project. "Can they stay forever?" "That's not up to me, sweetheart," Victor said. But as it turned out, maybe it was. A year after that snowy night in Humlegarden Park, Victor received a call from Detective Nielsen. Annika wanted to meet with him. She'd gotten sober in prison, gotten help, completed her rehabilitation program. And she'd made a decision. The meeting took place in a supervised room with social workers present. Annika looked different, healthier, clearer-eyed, but carrying a weight of sorrow that seemed to age her beyond her 30 years. "Mr. Lindgren," she said, her voice shaking, "I want to thank you for saving my children's lives, for giving them what I couldn't." "They're remarkable kids," Victor said gently. Annika nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They are. They deserve remarkable things. A remarkable life. A remarkable father." She took a shuddering breath. "That's why I'm voluntarily terminating my parental rights. I want you to adopt them, to give them the stability and love I can't provide." Victor felt his heart stop. "Annika, I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried so hard, but I'm not strong enough. I relapse. I make bad choices. And they deserve better than wondering when their mother will disappoint them again." She looked directly at him. "Promise me you'll tell them I loved them, that I tried, that they were worth everything, even if I wasn't strong enough to be what they needed." Victor's throat tightened. "I promise. And I'll make sure they know who you are, where they came from. They deserve that truth." The adoption was finalized on a December afternoon, almost 2 years to the day after Victor had found 2 children freezing in a park. Oscar, now 9, held Freya, now 2, as the judge declared them officially Victor Lindgren's children. Stella video called from London, crying happy tears as she watched her father become a father again, this time to her brother and sister. That evening, Victor sat in his living room, no longer immaculate and empty, but cluttered with toys and books and signs of life, and watched. Oscar was helping Freya build a tower of blocks, patiently rebuilding it every time she knocked it down with delighted giggles. Stella was on the video screen, saying goodnight to her siblings, promising to visit next month. His phone buzzed with messages from the office. There was always work to do, always another deal to close. But for the first time in years, Victor wasn't thinking about the next meeting or the next quarter's earnings. He was thinking about bedtime stories and tomorrow's breakfast and the parent-teacher conference next week. He was thinking about Oscar's upcoming science fair project and Freya's first words and Stella's spring break visit. His apartment was messy, chaotic, imperfect, and finally, it was full of love. 2 years ago, he'd been a man who had everything and felt nothing. A millionaire living in an empty penthouse, going through the motions of success while feeling completely hollow inside. Then 2 freezing children had stumbled into his life on a snowy December night. And everything changed. Oscar looked up from the blocks. "Victor? Are you okay?" Victor smiled, his eyes stinging with unexpected emotion. "Yeah, buddy. I'm perfect. Want to help us build?" "I'd love to." As Victor sat on the floor with his children, legally and forever now, building a tower of blocks that Freya would inevitably destroy, he understood something profound. He'd thought he was rescuing 2 abandoned children from freezing to death in a park. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful than that. They'd rescued him. From a life that looked successful on the outside, but was dying on the inside. From loneliness disguised as achievement. From forgetting that the greatest wealth isn't in a bank account. It's in the people who call you family. That night, after tucking both children into bed, Victor stood in the hallway between their rooms. He could hear Oscar's soft breathing, see the glow of his astronaut nightlight. From Freya's room came the gentle sound of her sleep machine playing lullabies. His phone buzzed again. Another work email. Another crisis that needed managing. He turned it off. Because right now, standing guard between the rooms of 2 children who'd been abandoned and frozen and terrified. 2 children who now slept peacefully because they finally felt safe. Victor Lindgren understood what success actually meant. It wasn't the company he'd built or the money he'd made. It was this, right here. This messy, imperfect, beautiful family that nobody had planned. Sometimes kindness isn't a choice. Sometimes it's destiny disguised as a child's voice in the snow saying, "Please, sir, help us." And sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply showing up when it matters most. Then letting those we help show us how to live again. Victor Lindgren thought he was taking a shortcut home through a frozen park. Instead, he found two children who needed him, and discovered he needed them just as much. That December night, a dying baby and a brave little boy didn't just get rescued from the cold. They rescued a lonely man from a life that looked perfect but felt hollow. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us. That's the real miracle of kindness. Oscar and Freya got a second chance at childhood because one man stopped walking past someone else's pain. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness changes everything. Subscribe for more true stories that prove love isn't about biology. It's about showing up. Hit that notification bell. Your heart will thank you. Because at the end of the day, we don't find purpose. Purpose finds us, usually when we stop looking and start caring.